this all revolves around the same thing. We end up with things that aren't going the way we'd like to see them. And in many cases, people just sit around and take it, or they don't believe it's that bad. And so what we're showing you here as well is a place where our friends at the city have decided that they are going to use money from Proposition 218 special districts, assessment districts, in ways that they weren't entitled to do. And we brought that before them before. We know that in the, as an example, over in the Shangri-La area, they had districts that were in the red and going in the red farther and farther and farther. And then finally, instead of balancing it out, they just decided to put the cost of pumping on a different district. And it didn't raise any ire because it wasn't that big of a deal as far as how much money came out of people's pockets. So they just kind of everybody kind of let it slide. And the situation is going and it's getting more and more desperate all the time. And it's going to continue until something happens that is going to have the public stand up and saying, I've had enough. Just like we talk about whether it's the special standards district, whether it's using finances improperly. And in this case, what happened is, in the middle of the year, and it sounds like it was a long time ago, but the mid-year adjustment for 17-18 gets reported on in 2019. And in the middle of the mid-year budget adjustment, and we've talked about things before that happened there because typically it's a big, long thing. There might be a line or two in the middle of it that does something. It normally ends up on the consent calendar, and the council doesn't even discuss it. But in this case, what it did was it took $2 million from the Open Space and Parkland Preservation District and swapped it out with $2 million to fund the Canyon Country Community Center land acquisition. And then when you looked at what they said, and this is a quote, that the expenditure reduction of $2,375,263 includes a $2 million funding swap from the Facilities Fund for the Canyon Country Community Center land acquisition and $17,000 in Public Education and Government Fund for an area enclosure and storage of public television equipment. Now, if you add those numbers up, they don't add up to $2,375,000. And they're obviously talking about several different things that they did at once. But they put it together just that way. Staff didn't question it. Nothing seemed to happen until they presented the report this year, in the middle of the year, to the Financial Accountability and Audit Panel that's set up to monitor the open space district. Now, you may not remember, but when the Open Space District was formed, it was about 2007, one of the things that they did was they set up a panel, this Open Space Financial Accountability and Audit Panel, to monitor how the money was being used. And each one of the council members put one person on the panel. And I was on the panel for the first 5 years. And so every year they would come and they would show us this report and ask us to approve their work plan for the next year. And there have been, and we'll talk about other situations where that panel has raised issues, but in this case, they brought that to the open space panel, and the audit panel went in and spoke in public participation because they don't even get an opportunity to tell the council what it is that they believe is going on with the district, and they spoke about this $2 million transfer out of the open space account. Now, the open space account is a Proposition 218 special assessment district, which means that it's established to perform a specific function, and it's voted in by the property owners of that area. a 218 assessment district provides a special benefit to property, not people, to property, and those property owners that are involved in the district then voted in or out. And it was voted in on the basis of everybody in Santa Clarita being within 3 miles of a park or open space. That's the justification for the special benefit that's conferred on your property. And you'll see that on your property tax bill as the open space preservation district. The facilities fund, on the other hand, is part of the general fund. It's non-discretionary money, which means that they can use it however they want. But they're not supposed to use open space money that way. It's supposed to be only used for what the district was provided for. So the FAAP members came up and they made a comment that this money was being used, should have been used to purchase undeveloped land. And there's a little bit of a controversy into whether that's totally true or not, but the whole thing is they raised this issue. And instead of being thought of as an audit panel and an audit finding, the city staff basically said, no, this is perfectly legal. We know what we're doing. You know, basically, you shouldn't be there. So let's just go back and research this in a little bit of history. The Canyon Country Community Center, which, by the way, I think is going to be a great project, something that I had been asking for since 2008, okay? But the land was not all purchased at one time. The land was, and I'll explain to you why I'm telling you this here in just a minute. The first section of land was obtained in 2014, okay? And it was agenda item 10, and they purchased 6.5 acres of vacant land for $4.7 million. Well, where'd the money come from? Well, the money didn't come from the facilities fund. The money came from the general fund in what they called the Capital Projects Reserve, which was account number 5201.004. And, you know, they always talk about, well, this money came from that account or that account, but that's not the facilities fund. And that land was undeveloped. No one had ever developed that land before. It sat between the where that white building on the corner was, and and behind Caruso's, so that was all undeveloped land. Then later, they decided, because you know we actually they asked us a few times, why don't you come and comment about what you'd like in the community center? And we told them, right, this is the kind of things we like. We want it to be a community center. It's supposed to be multi-generational. Supposed to have, you know, facilities within it. But they said, well, what about a pool? Would you like a pool? And they said, no, we don't want a pool because you got a pool at North Oaks Park. We don't need another pool. You want a basketball court? No, we don't think seniors are going to be out there playing basketball. That's not exactly what we want. But they kept enlarging this thing, and then they decided, you know what? We at the same time, we want to improve that corner at Soledad and Sierra Highway. And wouldn't it be nice if we could take Caruso's as well? So by eminent domain, they took both of them. Now, the people on the corner in that white building, the guy that owned it actually wanted to sell it. And I said, God bless him for buying it, for taking down that huge, humongous, ugly billboard that was on the corner for all that amount of time. I thought that was a great thing. But then they took the Caruso's building, and those people owned that building since the 50s and put them out of business. I thought, well, that wasn't really a good thing. But anyway, the Signal reported this deal the next day. That land is not undeveloped land. That land obviously was developed and is being redeveloped as a part of this project. And that land certainly was not undeveloped land. It was where a land where they tore things down, cleared it off, and then decided that they were going to use it as part of the community center. The third section was obtained from the county. And it's like a triangular sliver of land where they have a culvert that runs underneath Soledad Canyon. And at one time, I remember they were discussing, well, why don't we have the trail that runs down behind Arts Liquor? then continue on underneath Soledad and can continue up Sierra Highway. We're going, no, guys, we don't want that, because we can just imagine what's going to be underneath that culvert going on, and they finally changed their mind. But that land came from the county. So there was some land that was undeveloped, but it didn't come out of the facilities fund. So what's the problem? Well, when this was presented at the city council meeting, the city manager said, you know what we did was legal, appropriate, and consistent with the district approved by the voters. So you know what, I'm going to set up a meeting, because I know what's going on. I'm going to set this meeting up with the Financial Accountability Panel, and we're going to bring the city attorney. We're going to explain it, right? I mean, certainly if they can. I don't know why they didn't explain it already, but they said they were going to do that. And then Smythe got up and he said, you know what? This is just before hiatus. We're going to have that meeting before August the 26th, before we get back from hiatus. Now, if you have a meeting, if the city has a meeting and they invite the whole Financial Accountability Panel, and the Financial Accountability Panel is a Brown-acted committee, they have to notice it. It has to be a public meeting. You have the ability to attend. So I've been watching the agendas I've been waiting for this to pop up. And guess what? It didn't happen. So they got back from hiatus, and then we heard the city manager say, you know what? The Financial Accountability Audit Panel doesn't have the authority to dispute what we buy. Really? Well, in some instances, I agreed with him, okay? Because there are certain things that we agreed right at the beginning that the Financial Accountability is not going to do. We're not going to challenge how much they paid, because, you know, they supposedly go through this process that they do to determine whether or not this is a proper amount to pay for the thing. And we're not going to challenge the use, because the use, there can be a couple of different uses. If you go back to when the Open Space District was formed, it said that you could buy this land for open space, or 10% of the acreage purchased could be used for active parkland. So we're not going to challenge whether the use is correct, and we're not going to challenge the location in the city. So if it's an open space area and you purchase it, you purchase it. But at the same time, the Financial Accountability and Audit Panel definitely has the ability to dispute if you buy too much land to use for active parkland, over 10% of the acreage. There's no fat chance they're ever going to do that, because they purchase very little land for active parkland. It could be challenged. Or if the parcel is outside the 3-mile district boundary, because remember, this district is formed of a special benefit because everybody is within 3 miles of a park or open space. So rather than try to do this by finding every parcel of property in Santa Clarita, what they did was they drew a diagram 3 miles outside the city's boundary. And they said, we're not going to buy any land outside of that. And guess what? All of a sudden, they purchased a parcel of land where the tip of it was inside that 3-mile boundary. And they said, oh, if the tip of it's in, then we can buy the whole land. And we went, no, you can't. And we brought that up to City Council. And here the same thing happened. The Financial Accountability Panel found it, reported it, talked to some of the council people. Mr. Keller was one. And we waited 6 weeks and they did nothing. So I knew about it, but I wasn't on the panel then, and the panel wanted the ability to try to work it through the city first. And I said, fine, until I heard someone else mention it somewhere in public, and then I went and we started raising the issue. And you know what? They had to go back, and the way they fixed it was they changed the allotments of money. Okay, so if the land, and this is true, because if the land is not being used as open space or active parkland, well, it's an improper purchase, all right? So I believe the Financial Accountability Panel is really the right people to oversee what those expenditures are. And they should be the ones that say, you know what, maybe I can't tell you how much to pay or where the location should be, but I should be able to tell you if it's in support of what the district is supposed to be doing and what they're supposed to do. So I think that's exactly why the Financial Accountability Panel is there. So then Mr. Striplin said, the Canyon Country Community Center purchase is active parkland. Oh, that was interesting. So I decided to fact check him. So what better place to find out if a community center is a park than on the city website? Isn't that a great place to go? So I went out on the city website and I visited the Parks and Rec section of the website, and it said, the city of Santa Clarita offers 32 beautiful and well-maintained parks. None of them were a community center. See, the Parks and Recreation Division of Santa Clarita handles parks, community centers, and libraries. So if the community center is not a park, well, you can't use open space money to buy the land, right? It's not an appropriate use, okay? So since they're not parks, I wrote an article about this in the Gazette, so they know that that's what I'm going to come talk to them about. Not only is it improper use, but I want to know if it's not either one of those two, it's an improper use, and it's illegal to transfer money from a Proposition 218 assessment district to a discretionary fund to use money that's supposed to be used for one purpose and use it for another. So that we all agree with that. So which part, there are a bunch of unanswered questions. Which part of the land purchase is being paid back? Because only one part was undeveloped parkland, right, or undeveloped land. And since the original expenditure didn't come from the facilities fund, why are you paying them back? I don't understand that. And since the community centers are not designated parks, this doesn't fit the definition of active parkland, and it's not named in the city's 34 beautiful parks, and who better could tell us where the active parkland is but the city website, right? But if they want to start designating community centers now as parks, does the open space district resolution need to be updated? Do they have to go back now and update that resolution? And if they update that resolution, then a new ballot's going to be required to accept it or not. There's a danger this time the community may just say, you know what, no, I don't want it anymore, right? And there's good reason for that. One of the big reasons is the amount of money they charged. So what they did, if you remember or not, is that they started out by charging $25 a year and then increase it $1 a year every year for 30 years, right? Do you know why that number was 25 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1? Because that's exactly the amount of money it takes to pay back $30 million over that amount of time. Because that's what they said, they need $30 million. But they didn't borrow $30 million. They only borrowed 15. So they didn't need that amount of money in the first place, okay? And there's been a lot of, and so, but they keep increasing it, and anyway, $1 a year because they say they need the money. The next thing that caught my eye is, how far back do you think it would be legal for the city to go to claw this money back? You know, I know where they got this idea from, or I can't say that because I was not a fly on the wall when they discussed this, but I have a really good idea. You know, we talked a little bit about the manufactured home rent ordinance, and you know what they did to those people? Because of the way things were worded, they allowed the developers to go back and claw back money from 1995. Well, wait a minute. because of the way it was worded. So now, are you telling me that you had an extra $2 million and you're going to go claw money back from a purchase you made in 2014? Are you going to do that tomorrow for a purchase that you made in 2000? Is this inappropriate to do? And how, by the wording of this resolution, should you be allowed to do that? And the last thing that just irritated me to no end was when I looked into the engineer's report. Now, I understand that most people don't look into that stuff, and it's a good bedtime reading. It puts you to sleep really well. There's not much really interesting in it. But I went in there specifically because when I was on the Financial Accountability Panel, and they were actively looking for land to buy, they stuck in a charge of about $40,000 a year for administration. And they said, you know what, this is an appropriate expenditure because we are paying for the people that are out looking for the parkland to purchase. And we're talking about a fund that's got $15 or $30 million in it. And I thought to myself, well, okay, you know, we know that you have people out there looking. But today, if you go into this year's report, and they indicate that they plan to spend nothing this year, they're charging $755,000 for administration. And I raised that when this audit report came out, and couldn't get any of the council people to say a thing about it. And I'd like to know who is administering this fund. We got people at City Hall sitting on their thumbs for $755,000 a year. We ought to be looking at reducing staff. I mean, that's at least 2 to 3 heads. And what are they doing? If they're doing nothing, why are we paying them? So now, at the last council meeting, it got asked again. I don't know who asked them, but I have a stinking suspicion. When is Ken and the city attorney going to hold a meeting to answer the questions? And we were told again, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. You know, one of the things that annoy me to no end is that I believe that the way the city deals with certain problems is they just put off answering until they hope you forget about it. Okay, and it extremely annoys me when it started out. Remember, was it 4 years ago when that guy embezzled $500,000 from the city, right? Have we ever heard what they did to fix that problem? No, but they told us we were going to be open. We're going to do it. Then came the solar panels. Do you know it took a year for them to disclose what the boundaries of that park were? So, and I know that they were just hoping that people would forget, but every time I saw Tom Cole, I'd ask him the question, hey, Tom, you find this out yet? No, Al. I got to the point where when I started to walk up to him, he started to answer me. Okay. So I think they're just waiting, but we're not going to let this die. It's just not going to happen. Because this is the classic statement of all times. And this was from the Gazette when Lee Barnathan went and interviewed Marcia about this. And this is what she said. I'm assuming that all was looked at before the decision was made to go ahead and use the money to build an active park at the community center. When we receive information that an action is okay to take, we go by what staff puts forth. As far as I know, this was all done the way it was supposed to be done. And until something different comes up, that's the way we go about it. That's not what we have a city council for. City council is not there to let staff run them. They're supposed to run staff. And this was just, I mean, I went up there. I went up there sometimes and I ask them things, and they don't. You say, hey, what happened? And I've had Smythe get upset at me and say, you're talking to us like you think we don't know what's going on. Well, now I don't have to think it. I know it. So thankfully, we have the Financial Accountability Panel members who ask the questions and make the issue known. And I'm going to keep this alive until we get an answer. Okay? Now, remember I said I challenged these guys because, and I'm just gonna very quickly go through this because, and I'll explain to you why. Because, well, one thing is I just talked to them yesterday, and the other thing is that I've learned that whenever I get something from them verbally, I want to go back and verify it 3 different ways before I say much about it, because every time I've ever done that and I repeat back to them what they told me, they tell me I'm wrong. So we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. So in this particular case, it's talking about the budget. And every year, I'd say the most open thing in the budget is the capital improvement program. If you go through that 245 pages someday when you're staying awake in the evening, you'll find there's a section in it that takes each one of the capital improvement program projects by itself and has something to call expenditures on one side and then lists things out for 5 years. There's an example, and it makes it look like it is a budgeting work program. It is budgeted work over time. That's what it looks like. And I kept asking him because I try to take 1 or 2 of these and put them together, and they'd say, okay, we expended this much money here, and we still have this much money on a project. I'd add them together and say, well, that means that now it costs this much. They go, you're wrong. You can't use. This was one of the famous statements. You can't use the numbers from our reports with arithmetic and find out the answer. Oh, that's great. Thanks, guys. So anyway, after I challenged the council, and the council didn't say anything, didn't get any calls back, I challenged the city manager, and he said, oh, well, I'll be happy to sit down with Al and I'll explain it to him. So I called him the next day. I hope he didn't think if he said that I wasn't going to call. And I went and visited him. Frank Oviedo was there the next day. And to start with, we have to start with a clarification of terminology, the city speak. A lot of times city speaks, they say one thing, but that's not really what it means. So let me ask you a question. If I told you that I expended a certain amount of funds in prior years, what would that mean to you? Would it mean they spent it? Isn't that what you would think it meant? That's not what it means. What it means is expenditures are revenue spent and appropriated. So what they're trying to, when you see something over here that says I've expended $47 million, that means that the council has approved an expenditure somewhere inside that $47 million plus the amount they spent. Okay? So what happens is that when you look at their representations, it doesn't include a complete project. It may be parts of a project. And it really defines the status of how they're going to appropriate the money, not how they're going to do the work. So you have to know when you're looking at a project or a piece of a project where it fits. And I'll show you examples when I put it all together for you. And so it's not a work spend plan. So that changes the whole ballgame, right? Of course, because now you can't tell how much money they spent. But they did claim that the actuals for how much money they spent is in the end of the year's report. And that's why I'm not going to talk to you today about it and give you specifics, because I'm going to look at the samples that we talked about. I'm going to look at the reports. We're going to put them all together. We're going to show you whether or not what they told me matches what they actually do. So you'll get a complete report next month, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it immensely.